And on behalf of Mammoth Voices, I am so excited to see each and every one of you for this, what I expect will be quite an interesting and engaging presentation today. I would like to thank our candidates, Chris and Tim and Jay, for having traveled here and there, Hill and Dale, to be here. As those of us who live here in Mammoth know, it's not always a done deal that you're going to get where you need to be in the morning, so it's nice to have you here. Our leadership team, Mammoth Voices, I'll tell you about Mammoth Voices in just a sec, but the folks who are involved in making Mammoth Voices run are myself, Kathleen Taylor, Debbie North, who's the great communicator, yay! Nicole Godoy, who will be our timer today, and Mickey Brown, who's out of town, just lollygagging around like she likes to do. If anybody is interested in being on the Mammoth Voices communication, let Debbie North know. Again, Debbie North. So what is Mammoth Voices anyway? Mammoth Voices, I'll tell you what it isn't. It's not a club, it's not an organization, we have no dues, we have no rituals. We're all about civic discourse. That's what we're about. Mammoth Voices was started in Mammoth at a time when civility kind of wasn't around with regard to elections. And Nicole and Mickey felt so strongly about it that this group began. We meet every first and third Thursday right here in this room. You're welcome to come. The way you can come is to so easy. Our meeting format today is quite different than it normally is, for those of you who are used to this, but we have the important work of elections coming up, so we made a few modifications. So why does Mammoth Voices exist? As I said, we're about civil discourse, and I'm going to say we are about civil discourse around civic issues. Very important. What we do, we've got 4 pillars. We strive to identify and thoroughly understand our issues. Fact, data, really what's going on. We want to share this information with our friends and neighbors in town so everybody's dealing with the facts and not just innuendo and political comments. We encourage civil leaders to be really well informed and to work off of facts. And lastly, we promote leadership. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to really put our heads together to plan a leadership academy for the community in the fall. So, our moderator for the Q&A today, I would like to thank ahead of time Mr. Rich Bacha, who agreed to put himself in the middle of the hornet's nest, which we will not have. Because we're all about civility. Right? We're all about civility. We want to hear everybody's ideas, and we are excited to do so. Rich, who is right now the XO of the Mammoth Lakes Foundation, a treasure left by Dave McCoy when he went down to Bishop, has a lot of things he's going to tell you about our rules of engagement. He will do the introductions of the candidates. And Rich, carry on.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
You can do better than that. Come on. Good morning.
Good morning, Rich.
Okay, we are short on time today, so I'm going to roll us through this fairly quickly. I'm going to start with the rules of engagement. This is about civil discourse, as Kathleen said. Kind, courteous. We want to hear your stories. Why do you want my vote? Okay, so some simple rules. Number 1, the candidates will be seated at the table. Thank you very much for coming to visit with us today. Let's give them a nice round of applause up front. Number 2, you're going to draw lots to determine the order in which we'll be giving opening statements. I'm going to make this real easy. We're going to go in alpha order by first name. Okay, so I'll let you guys figure out A, B, C. Number 3, we'll alternate the order of speaking. So whoever went first will go to the last position. 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 1. We'll rotate through. Candidates be allowed up to 3 minutes to making an opening and closing statement. The candidates will be timed. My friend Nicole is my timer. At the 30-second mark, she will give you the peace sign. You got 30 seconds to wrap that, okay? And at that time, we will say thank you very much. Not to be rude, but thank you very much. For the audience, Please turn off pages, cell phones, and other electronic devices during the forum. Number 2, please refrain from any vocal reactions for or against candidates or statements made by our candidates. They're friends. We're here to listen to them today, to hear their stories. Please, it's requested to remain silent during the forum. We want to maintain an oasis of neutrality and may applaud when moderator me has announced that the forum is ended. We'll go through questions and then we'll go through any questions we may have from the floor. And last, thank you to the crowd for coming today. These are exciting times in this country, so give yourselves a nice round of applause for coming out. On September 25th, 1789, Congress adopted the 10 Amendments that became the original Bill of Rights. They have been expanded to 27 amendments over the history of this country. The 15th Amendment, Section 1, talks about the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. May we begin? Our first question centers on our candidates' issues and priorities. This will be a 3-minute question. There are 2 sections to this. Oh, that's right. Opening statement. Thank you. We're rolling. Opening statement. So we're going to start with Chris. Opening statement, please.
Thank you so much. It's kind of surreal to be here looking at the mountain and standing before you. I never expected to stand in front of you today. I'm so sorry to the people who have my back. Thank you for having my back. My career was spent in the biotech industry. What I loved about my job was that I brought therapies for cancer and HIV to people who previously didn't have the opportunity to have, cutting-edge therapies. What I loved about my job was that I was able to bring doctors and patients the opportunity for cures for a diagnosis that previously had been terrifying and sometimes even a death sentence. But very early on in my career, I saw firsthand, as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, and as a friend, what happens when our current system of healthcare gets in the way of getting people the access they need to care. I had to stand up to my own insurance company to get coverage for my daughter's epilepsy, some of the tests that she needed. Friends who have known her whole life are nodding. Tests that she needed to make sure that she could get the care she needed. I was a professional and knew how to do this, and the amount of time and energy it took was shocking to me. Another time, a dear friend of mine got a very aggressive breast cancer. And one afternoon when I went to the park to take her son to the park with her, instead we spent the entire afternoon fighting with her insurance company to try to get coverage for the therapy I worked on. So throughout my career, I knew that our healthcare system was broken. When we finally passed the Affordable Care Act, I thought that we were on the path to making sure that we had quality, affordable healthcare for everyone in this country. And then Congress, in 2016, decided that they were going to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, 2017. And so I left my career in biotech and I started to work as an advocate to make sure that we kept and expanded healthcare for Americans. Through that process, I learned that there are representatives who will vote against things like the ACA, and Representative Cook voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and that's what got me started on the path to running for this seat. So I want to make sure that we all have access to quality, affordable health care, but in the journey throughout this district, I've also learned that people in our district want access to 21st century jobs. They want to make sure that they can educate their children, earn a living wage, have reasonable cost of living, and retire with dignity. And that's what I plan to do in Washington in support of the supervisors and state legislators all throughout our district.
Thank you, Chris.
So much.
Jay, please, opening comments.
I think I can see everyone. I'm going to stay seated here, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Jay Obernolte. I'm actually not a politician. I'm a video game developer. So I started 30 years ago a company out of my dorm room at Caltech making video games, and I've run it for the last 30 years. I still have 26 employees at our studio. I live in Big Bear Lake. In the mountains, a very similar community to this. So I got into public service 15 years ago. It was an interesting story how it happened. It came through a hobby of mine. I fly light aircraft. I'm a pilot and I'm a flight instructor. And so I've been a tenant at our little airport in Big Bear. We have an airport very similar to yours here in Mammoth. So 15 years ago, a bunch of the tenants of the airport had it with the bad management. They had a board that was in the paper every day. They were calling each other names. There was a lot of vitriol, and so they came to me and they said, "Jay, you ought to run for a seat on the board of directors." And I said, "Fellas, I don't have any idea about politics or parliamentary procedure or elections." And they said, "Well, that's okay. You know management because you run a business, and you also know airports and airplanes." And here was the kicker. They said, "You can't possibly be worse than what we've got." So I figured, if the bar was really that low, maybe I would try and see if it suited me. And so I ran for election, and I was elected. Much to my surprise, it was a really good fit for my talents and capabilities. So I served 5 years on that board, 3 terms as president. There was an open seat on city council when my term was up, so I ran for city council, was elected 4 years on council. Ran for mayor, was elected to serve 2 terms as mayor, and then in 2014 ran for my current position, which is the assemblyman for the 33rd district in the California State Legislature. So that district represents about 2/3 of the congressional district, not unfortunately the city of Mammoth, but most of the southern parts of the district is what I currently represent. So I am really passionate about any issues that are fiscal. I'm vice chair of the budget committee. I sit on the committee for appropriations, the joint legislative budget committee, and a small group of people called the budget conference committee, which I tell you, they lock us in a windowless hearing room in Sacramento for a week every May to reconcile the Senate budget, the Assembly budget, and the governor's budget into one document. So one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about representing you in Congress is because of my experience on these fiscal issues. At least in California, as part of our state constitution, we have a balanced budget amendment that says that we cannot run a structural deficit. We do not have that at the federal level, and the statistics are truly alarming. Is that 30 seconds? Okay. Truly alarming. We'll talk more about this later, but the Congressional Budget Office says by the year 2050, on the pace we're going, we will have over 10% of our gross domestic product going just to debt service on the national debt. Not 10% of our tax revenue, 10% of everything our country makes. So we are leaving that legacy to our children and their children unless something is done, and I think I can help. So I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Jay. Tim, what do you got for us?
Hi, I'm Tim Donnelly. I am a former California State Assemblyman, served in the same seat prior to Jay taking the seat. I grew up with 14 brothers and sisters, and so at the dinner table, my dad said that I was destined for politics because I was always filibustering. But that's what you had to do to get food. So, for me, this is a personal thing. The politics, I'm an outsider. I'm not interested in committees and in all the minutia. I'm interested more in the bigger picture, in who we are, where we're going as a people. And so for me, what's critically important is the idea of freedom. When I came to California, I had a lot more hair, a lot less money, but I drove a VW Bug out here, and just, I wanted to be a Californian. I'd come out from Michigan, and I got to this place, and it was just pristine. It was golden. It was this incredible land of opportunity. It was easy to get a job. I registered for college, and even though I was out of state, they charged me less than University of Michigan was charging me. I mean, it was just awesome. It was like I just saw an unlimited future for our state, and then here we are, some 30 years later, and I'm watching people literally leave our state because they feel like the government has become their enemy. They feel like the government that in our Declaration of Independence that says that its job, its purpose, governments are formed to protect our inalienable rights, that of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I like that pursuit of happiness. It doesn't mean we're all going to agree on everything. I know that in this room we probably have radical disagreements on issues and how to solve problems, but in the end, it's about freedom. It's about the freedom to disagree. It's about the freedom to live your life as you choose, as long as you're not harming another human being. And I just feel that California is on the cusp. We're either going down, or we could have a renewal and a revival and become that amazing golden state again. And part of it does have to do with having good representatives who get it and have a vision.
Thank you. Thank you. Give our candidates a nice round of applause. Good opening comments. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the questions. First one's about issues and priorities. There are 2 questions. Each question is 3 minutes each. The current political landscape seems highly polarized. Voters wonder how elected officials will accomplish important business or even achieve their own priorities in the highly charged political world on the Hill. First question, we're going to start with Jay on this, then we'll go to Tim and then back to Chris. What are your top 3 priorities for representing our district to the U.S. House of Representatives, and how will you work with members of the other party to achieve these priorities? Jay, please.
So I started telling you about my first priority, which is fiscal discipline. That's something that I think that every government agency has the obligation to do, which is to be able to tell its constituents that we are wisely and appropriately spending the money that you give us. So that's something that I have a lot of experience doing, something that I'm very passionate about doing in Congress. That's certainly one of my top priorities. Another priority is the cost of living. I don't have to tell you that people in our district are struggling. They're struggling to pay their bills, they're struggling to afford housing, they're struggling to afford food, they're struggling to afford health care. And that is unacceptable. And that has not traditionally been the case. But California stands out as being the worst state in the nation for that. And I'm going to tell you some statistics that I hope shock you, because when I learned about them, they shocked me. Did you know that California has the highest poverty of any state in the country, according to the U.S. Census Bureau? Do you know that, according to HUD, we have the worst rate of homelessness of any state? Did you know that almost half of the unhoused homeless population in the entire nation are right here in California? So we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And what role did government play in getting us into this mess? And what role can our government play in getting us out of this mess? And if you look at the genesis of the housing crisis, of course, it's complex, it's multifaceted, but certainly it starts with the high cost of housing, and it starts with the high cost of living, everything, energy, food, insurance here in California. So that is something that I am really passionate about solving. I feel like as a businessman and a business owner for 30 years and as a public servant for 15 years that I have a lot of experience with that. I know how local governments work because of my experience in local government and the problems that local governments face, and I'm impassioned about helping them solve those things. And I think it's also, before we move on to the topic of homelessness, very important to realize that solving the problem of homelessness and poverty means more than just putting people in shelters. And that's one of the things the governor and I got into a big disagreement last Friday about, because all of the current state housing policies are focusing on shelters, and I think we need to focus on getting people to be able to afford homes. That's the only way that we're going to solve that problem. And then my third priority is personal freedom. This is something that we are struggling with as a nation, as a society, because if you look at throughout human history how democracies evolve, this is something all democracies struggle with, is the bureaucracy grows and grows and grows, and it's always easier to add a new bureaucracy than it is to take one away. In fact, in the state budget this year, we are adding 25 new bureaucracies to state government. So that path is an unsustainable one. And we've gotten way too far down the path of eroding our personal liberties and our personal freedoms. And so we need to stand up for those things and remind ourselves that government exists to serve us, not we exist to serve government. So I'm very passionate about solving those problems for you.
Very good, thank you. Tim, 3 priorities, and how will you work with members of the other party to accomplish these priorities?
Well, my number 1 priority is going to be to reform our immigration system. And by immigration system, I mean our legal immigration system. Currently we make it almost impossible to come to this country unless you're wealthy. and there's so many roadblocks, and it takes so long. My own wife, who's here today, Rowena here, her grandfather was separated from his family for 12 years. That was the cost of becoming an American. And you hear all the time that, you know, that we all came here as immigrants, and that immigration makes us stronger, right? Well, sure it does, as long as we come together. There's a coming together and assimilation as Americans, and we're not going to have that if we allow unchecked illegal immigration, if we reward unchecked illegal immigration, and take the legal system, the people who come in here through the front door, who show us respect and don't actually accommodate them. You know, it's just, so that's my number one priority. How would I work with people of the other party? You'd be shocked at how many people have constituents, have family members who have struggled with our immigration system because it penalizes you. If you make one misstep, you can be kicked out of the country. Meanwhile, if you came in the wrong way, it's much more difficult to be deported. And so I would say, I think that you can find common ground in any issue. My second priority is going to be the Second Amendment. And I'm probably not going to get a lot of help from the other party. But I can tell you this, to me, the Second Amendment is freedom. It's the 26 most powerful words in the English language. A well-regulated militia. And here's the operative phrase: being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We don't have freedom. We don't have the ability to determine our own future if we do not have the ability to defend that freedom. And it's not just freedom, it's also to defend our lives from somebody who wishes to do evil. And you saw examples of that recently in a church where people had to stand up and end a real threat that was right there in their faces, that had come into their church to take lives. And it was somebody who was exercising the Second Amendment who defended that. And my third would be veterans. I can't say much about that because I'm out of time.
Thank you. Chris, please.
Thank you so much. I'm standing because I just want to make sure I'm able to project. My voice has been overused lately. So my first priority, as I mentioned earlier, is that I want to make sure that we protect and expand access to quality, affordable health care for everyone. And I do believe that there are many ways that we can work across the aisle, because ultimately one of the special challenges that we face in our district is that with our rural communities and our rural hospitals, we have even greater challenges. I think that obviously trying to find representatives who are from rural communities and work in partnership to make sure that we have programs where physicians can come in and be brought to our rural areas and encouraged to stay are the kinds of things where we find common ground and then we work together. Look, I have a business background. I have had to work with all types of people. I am a woman engineer who is not all that young, so I had to go into spaces very early in my career where I wasn't really expected or welcome. And you know what? Once you talk to people, we all agree. So the second thing that's really important for our district is that we have an incredible opportunity with our natural resources in terms of unlimited opportunity for renewals to bring the kinds of 21st century jobs all throughout our district, but particularly in our areas down around Victorville in the high desert communities, where we have a lot of people that have to commute an hour and a half down the hill, as we call it, down the 15, into Riverside and San Bernardino. Why not harness the wind and sun, bring data centers, manufacturing, all the kinds of jobs that people in those high desert communities want and need. At the same time, for communities like Mammoth, we all know what we need in Mammoth. Broadband, support for small business, those are all things where you can easily find common ground, because those are pro-business and you can find partnership and people to work with. So those are the kinds of things where I think there's lots of appetite for us to find and work in partnership. And the last thing is to make sure that we are supporting our working families, that we are making sure that people can earn a living wage, that they have the support they need when they need it, that we do address our housing challenges. And we have an incredible Board of Supervisors in Inyo County that I would love to be able to work with and make sure that we are providing the federal resources they need to be able to implement the programs they've already outlined. Thank you so much.
Very good, Chris, thank you. Let's go to the second question under issues and priorities. Which would be more important to you? Standing behind the views and policies promoted by your own political party, or advocating for policies that support us in your district? I'm going to start with Tim on this question, please.
Sure. So, it's kind of a trick question in a sense.
It is.
And it's very clever that you put that out there. But look, you have to be able to do both. You really do. You have to balance it. You are all here because you want to know what the candidates stand for, and you want to hear from us, you want to meet us, because we could, one of us here at this table could be your next congressman or woman. But essentially what that role is, it's a representative. So you want to know what our principles are. And with me, what you see is what you get. I've laid it all out. I actually have 12 or 14 principles laid out on my website, what I believe in. I've already mentioned guns. I'm absolutely pro-defending the Second Amendment. I'm pro-life. I'm in tremendous favor of reforming our VA, to fight for our veterans. I'm for a secure border, but I am for immigration. So there's a lot of different principles on which I stand, and you're going to want to know where I stand. And some of you may say, hey, I'll never vote for you. That's fine. You know where I stand. I'm not going to be a stealth candidate who's going to come in and tell you one thing and do another. So it's important that you know that. At the same time, when you go be a representative, you've got to be able to work with other people. So I'll give you a for instance. There was a committee that I was never going to get a bill through because the chairman had basically told me, you're never going to get a bill through my committee. And I brought a bill to him, and he reluctantly had to pass it through his committee because I brought with him his entire constituency. So I had the far right and the far left together in a room. I had the Tea Party and I had the Berkeley City Council. I had the Siskiyou County Board of Supervisors and the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in support of something because I stood up on a principle that united people. And that's what we really need, I think, in this day and age, is to start fighting for that which is right, regardless of our personal feelings. Is that peace or is that done? Oh. So I think there's some real hope for us to move forward, regardless of who becomes our representative as a people, because we have to. And it's great that we're talking to each other. I like the idea of voices, and I will be a voice for you.
Very good, thank you. Jay, please.
It's interesting when you talk about the role of political parties, and they have a role in our system, but sometimes I think that role has been exaggerated into a litmus test that everyone has to pass or fail. And I disagree with that. I think that as a representative, it's my job to make the best decision that I can on every issue I have to vote on for the constituents that elected me and sent me to Sacramento or to Washington, D.C. And I take that responsibility very seriously. I'm known as the person who reads every bill. And I do. I believe it's my responsibility to read and know what's in every single bill I vote on. I'm told that if elected to Congress, I will no longer be able to do that. But my response is, we'll see about that. Another thing that I'm known for, and I'm a big believer in, is bipartisan cooperation. From outside of Sacramento, your perception might be that everything is partisan politics, it's very contentious, but I can tell you, as someone who has served in the legislature for the last 6 years, nothing could be further from the truth. We agree on about 90 to 95% of the bills that pass through Sacramento. They are what's called support, meaning that both caucuses from both parties have a support recommendation on them. Because we're all there for the same reasons. We're there to improve the quality of life of the constituents, not only in our district, but in the state of California. So I think that that is really important. And if you want to know how I would conduct myself in Washington, just look at how I've conducted myself in Sacramento. I have passed more legislation than any other, I'm a member of the minority, but even as a member of the minority, I've passed more legislation than any other minority member of either chamber over the last 6 years. But I'm more proud of the fact that I've passed more legislation than any other member of the Inland Empire Caucus of either party. And it's because I take bipartisan cooperation very seriously. The way that I look at it, because we're all there for the same reasons, even though we disagree on how to get to where we're going, does not mean that we're not playing for the same team. And it's important to remember that. I count most of the members of the legislature as my personal friends, even though we might disagree on the floor, even though we might vote different ways. My wife and I, for the past several years, have taken over an institution called Bipartisan Dinners. We host every month at our condo next to the Capitol. My wife Heather, by the way. She cooks a home-cooked meal, and we take a small group of people from both parties, introduce them to each other, break bread together, and talk about our personal lives and our viewpoints, and just try and build common ground. And that has been incredibly successful. That is what I would hope to accomplish for you in Congress.
Very good, thank you. Chris, finish us up.
Okay. So, as your representative, which I very much hope to be, my job, as I understand it, is to represent all 720,000 people of this district. And in order to do that, what you have to do is be available, hold town halls, be accessible, take meetings with your constituents, and really understand how we can get that utilitarian answer, which is the greatest good for the greatest number. We aren't always going to agree on everything, but as my two colleagues have said, we agree on much more than we disagree on as a country. I will, I'm not a politician. I want to be a public servant. And as such, what I really see my path forward being is to make sure that I take in all of those viewpoints and then go to Washington and bring back the solutions for our area. So as a result, I have decided I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. And with that comes the freedom of not having to answer to anyone and really just being able to answer to my voters. So that's really the first way that I would really go about addressing this challenge. And then the other thing is, I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget that I'm not afraid to stand up for what I believe is right. There are times in your life where, there's a decision that's being made and you don't agree with it. And I have had to, in many cases in my life, whether it's in my business, life, or recently with thinking about how important I felt personally that the Affordable Care Act and the protections it provided to people with pre-existing conditions, I felt so strongly about that then I went and stood up to elected officials with members of the disability community to say it's very important that we don't take back health care from 20 million Americans. So I think there's a way to do that and still have it be part of civil discourse, but that you really make sure that you are keeping your constituents in mind. I will always lead with what's best for our families, what's best for our children, and how we make sure that we're taking care of our veterans and our seniors. And if that's my guiding force and I'm listening to my constituents, then I'm doing my job for all of you. Thanks.
Very good. Okay, let's go to our second section. This talks about representation. You alluded to building common ground based on the greater good. How do you communicate with 700,000 people? We're far-flung, far from Washington, D.C., far from Sacramento. So those next two questions focus on how do you represent us? The first part, 3 minutes each. I'm going to start with Jay on this one. If you win and the election results for the two top getters are very close, how will you represent the 49% of the folks that didn't vote for you? How do you find common ground? Jay, start us off.
First of all, I hope to do better than 51%. Past that. Look at my track record as a member of the legislature. I represent currently the second largest assembly district in the entire state. It is almost 10,000 square miles of very rural California, 7 different cities, and countless different communities. Very challenging to represent. Most of the time I'm required to be in Sacramento 4 days a week, which means I go up on Monday, come back on Thursday, and the remainder of the time is the time that I have to liaise with my constituents. But I take that job very seriously. And if you look at the way that I've run my office for the last 6 years, I think that will demonstrate to you my commitment to getting to every single corner of the congressional district and making sure that I listen to the people who I represent. It's very important. Last night, actually, I was presented with an award that probably means more to me than any other award that I've received in the legislature. It was presented to me by Inyo County Supervisor Matt Kingsley. He's the outgoing chairman of what we call RCRC, the Rural, Rural Communities of Representatives of California, RCRC. They are the leading voice for rural elected officials in the state of California, and they're very effective advocates for us. But they presented me with the Rural Leadership Award because of how hard I work at connecting to my constituents and representing a rural community in what is essentially a very urbanized legislature. And that means a lot to me. I think that as representatives, our obligation is to get in front of our constituents, and more important than talking is listening. We need to figure out what's going on in the communities we represent, what are the problems that they're facing, what can we do about them, and then we need to go back to Sacramento or Washington, D.C. and solve those problems. And if we can do those things, then we're an effective representative. And you know what, if we can't do those things, we don't deserve to represent you. So that certainly would be my commitment to you.
Very good, thank you, Jay. Okay. Chris, excuse me, no, sorry, Tim. Got my alphabet soup mixed up here. I'm a kindergarten teacher by trade, my apologies.
Well, my mom always said, keep it simple, stupid, to me. And so I'm going to keep it simple. How will I represent you? Very simple. I will put an office here in, well, not here in Mono County, but in Inyo County, in Bishop. I will have one full-time staffer, at least, that will be available so that you don't have to drive 6 hours to go see a staffer in order to get help. And given the fact that both Mono and Inyo County are federally owned, more than 90% of the land, it's a big deal. It's a big deal if you own a business. It's a big deal if you have any sort of business before the federal government. You know, we can talk all day about what our beliefs are, we can talk all day about what our principles are, but in the end, you need something practical. You need an actual body that can help fight for you when you have some sort of an issue with a federal agency. So that's number one. And number two, because I am a principled individual, and that's what drove me when I was first elected. And I won my first election by a single vote per precinct by walking door to door, which is what I'm doing now. I can tell you this. Politics makes strange bedfellows. In 2015, I wound up being the proponent of a referendum against SB 277, which, if you're familiar with, is a forced vaccination law that California passed. And so I organized tens of thousands of very liberal Democrats who were united by the fact that they were moms, they were parents, and they were concerned about their kids, and they wanted the freedom to make a choice about what went into their children's bodies. And so I think that's a good example of a way that you can actually have people come together without compromising. You know, I had more fights with conservative Republicans over whether or not to defend freedom, what people call health freedom or medical freedom, or basically the right to decide what goes into your child's body. I mean, you know, at some point we have to say enough is enough. I'm not going to give the government that kind of power I'm going to make that decision myself. And by the way, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I actually vaccinated my kids, but I made that choice. I made an informed decision. And I think it's important to have the ability to work with other people. Sometimes a sense of humor helps. And I think passion is an important component of that as well.
Very good, thank you, sir. Chris, please.
I would represent you the way I have run this campaign. So I don't know if you all know, but on April 22nd, Earth Day, we started at Mammoth Lake at sunrise and ended in Joshua Tree at sunset. We didn't get to stop in the San Bernardino Mountains, but it's not because I don't love them as well. And we show people of this country what is so special and precious about this congressional district. That was very intentional to bring attention to the district because, quite frankly, I think we can all agree that a lot of times it feels like California's 8th congressional district is overlooked, ignored, and exploited, for lack of a better way of saying it. I want to make sure that we stop that by standing up to some of the other parts of California that tend to want to come to us for recreation or take our water 100 years ago and not, be willing to discuss any of the implications that it's had for our district. And so I have showed up in almost every town in our district. I have to say almost because I still have to get to Needles, and I am going to do it, Charlie, if that's the last thing I do. We held a healthcare town hall at the San Bernardino County Fairgrounds in Victorville. I've had many, many coffees and meetings here, and that's the way that a representative stands in front of their constituents, understands the needs and concerns, collects that information, and then goes to Washington. The other thing is I'm very proud to be collaborating with a lot of local leaders about the issues all throughout the district to understand what are the needs on the local level and how can we in Washington make sure we're bringing back the resources that we need to protect our district. So frankly, I'll just do what I've been doing, and that is showing up, being accessible and available, and making sure that I am listening more than speaking, because I think that that's the job of a representative. So thank you.
Very good. So the second part of this question, that's all said and done. It's great stuff, You come, you tell us your story, we elect you, and we never see you again. We represent you to be our voice in either Sacramento or DC at this point in time. So be specific. You began to allude to it a little bit. What are you going to do to keep your ear to the ground for the needs of the folks in the 8th District? Mono County specifically, our neck of the woods. We're remote. People say, hello, we love you, we never see you again. So be specific. How do you stay connected with us? How do you hear our voice, and how do you move that forward? I'm going to start with Tim with this one, then go to Chris, and then Jay. Please.
I'm going to wear out a lot of set of tires. I can tell you that right now. And as a representative of the 59th Assembly District, which then became the 33rd, I go everywhere. I meet with everyone. It doesn't matter if you agree with me. So I'm going to give you an example. I represented Claremont. Claremont is known as the city of trees and PhDs. It is one of the most liberal cities in California, and they got one of the most conservative Tea Party Republicans, Minuteman leader from the border as their representative. Can you imagine how horrified they were? And so we had a town hall. And it was amazing. You want to know why it was amazing? Because we talked as human beings. We didn't agree on any policy, except for the fact that I was an outsider. And we found some common ground, because I think a lot of us feel like outsiders. We feel like outcasts. I live in a mountain community where we don't have a city government, we don't have a city council. I don't want one. We're the county's not always responsive, but we have our freedom. We have the ability to do largely what we want to do. But the thing is, you don't know a people unless you spend time among them. I've been up here more times than I can count, and I was really ticked off last election cycle when one of the Mammoth papers, I forget which one it was, I think it was called Sheets or something like that, said that I had never been here. even though I have a photograph of me riding a horse called Freedom in the parade, doing all kinds of events up here, and it was like, really, what do I have to do to prove that I came up here? Because there's no place I'd rather come to. You have a really beautiful, spectacular home. And if there was any place I was going to move in California, it would be up here. And I'm not saying that to pander for votes. I realize I'm probably not going to get a lot of votes in this room. But you know what? If I'm your representative, you're going to be able to approach me. When I voted in the assembly, I did two things, because I believe transparency is one of the most important things. I was the very first legislator ever in the state of California to completely release my calendar, so you knew who I was meeting with. Whether they were lobbyists or whatever, whoever I met with, you got to see it, it was public. Second thing I did is I put all of my votes online. And I told you why I voted. Most of the time I voted no. I had more no votes than pretty much anybody. But you knew why and you could respond. And I think that's communication.
Very good, Tim. Thank you. Chris?
Feels like a softball because my love for Mammoth and the Eastern Sierra is why I started this, another one of the reasons that I started this journey. So if you want to talk to me, you just go to Vaughn's. Although I have to say, you aren't seeing as much of me around these days as I would have hoped. And there's a very specific reason for that. I love Mammoth and Inyo and Obernolte County. I understand these places. I know what we need here. What I didn't know as well was what the people of the high desert communities around Victorville needed. And I want to tell you that those are places that deserve as much attention as the Eastern Sierra. The unemployment rate in Adelanto is still double the national average. That's not right. The challenges and the frustrations that we feel up here in the Eastern Sierra about the fact that we don't have the funding we need to take care of our federal lands and protect ourselves against wildfires, which is also a problem in your communities. The fact that the people in Inyo County still feel like their water was stolen 100 years ago and nobody will listen to their concerns and complaints. We have the same challenges in San Bernardino County. The people in San Bernardino County are now afraid that companies are going to come in, build large-scale solar, ship the electricity down to Los Angeles and Orange County, and just take our resources again. So I have intentionally put our campaign office in Victorville because I wanted to make sure that I was understanding and able to represent the people there as well as I can represent the people here. So you may not always see me, but you can have my cell phone number. It is on my card, and I answer my phone. Ask anybody who's tried to call me. So that's the way that you have to do it. And thank goodness we have technology. We have email. We have, great staffers like Charlie. Like Charlie is solving problems for people already, even though I'm not elected yet. We had a person who wasn't getting her Social Security checks, and Charlie called Colonel Cook's office, Representative Cook's office, to look into it because it's the right thing to do. I mean, that's what kind of representation you all want and deserve. And we just started doing it already because, I mean, we might as well get used to the job if we really want to do it.
Thank you, Chris. Jay, why don't you finish up on that question, sir?
Well, clearly, representing an enormous congressional district like the 8th is a big challenge, but I would approach it the same way that I've approached representing the second largest assembly district in California. You have to have a commitment to travel, for sure. It's particularly difficult representing people in Congress because the commute is ghastly. So you have to have a commitment to getting out of DC and coming back here. And if you look across the country, some representatives aren't so good at that. But I love my home. I have a family here, I have a business here. You can bet that I will be back as often as I can. And I've already demonstrated a commitment to traveling around the district. The eastmost city that I currently represent is the city of Needles. And if you've been out there, you know it's a long ways from anywhere. But the mayor of Needles a couple of months ago told me something that was one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. He said, "Jay, you know you are always here. I got to hand it to you. You're always here. When we have an event, when we need you out here, you always manage to get out here. And I want you to know how much we appreciate that." That really meant a lot to me, to have someone in a city like that say, "It's not always been that way, but you know, you as our representative, we see a lot of you." And I would certainly continue that. I want to talk about staff a little bit, because staff is a centrally important part of representing you, either in the legislature or in Congress. In fact, I would say that the ability to attract and manage a good staff is probably the most important thing that your representative does for you, because that staff is the one that, when you call the district office, they're going to go to bat for you with various state and federal agencies, making sure your problem gets solved. You need to attract and retain a staff with a heart for constituent services. And I say unabashedly, without reservation, I have the best staff of any assembly district in California. They have a heart for constituent service. They love their constituents. They love the communities that we represent. We have instituted mobile office hours, where we send a team of staff members around to every community in the entire district, and when they get finished with the list, they just start over again. It's like painting a bridge, right? It never stops, because we don't want people to have to drive hundreds of miles to get in front of someone who can solve their problems. So that's something that I would certainly continue doing for you in Congress. And one last thing that I'd like to point out is that representing a rural community is not easy in our democracy, because our democracy apportions representation based on population. So that means that as people who live in a rural area, we are always going to be outnumbered by people who represent urban areas, because we have all the land, they have all the people. And so I hope that whoever you elect to Congress is someone that deeply understands the issues that our districts faces, loves our rural communities, and is able to articulate those problems when they get to Washington, D.C., because it's critically important.
Very good, thank you. Let's go to our third section. We're doing pretty well on time. Let's talk about local impact. Let's bring it home. There are a number of federally funded programs that provide essential services to Inyo County residents and directly impact county operations. For example, food stamp, payment in lieu of taxes, community development block grants that fund housing, preschools, and other essential programs. I want to combine this because these are kind of two big questions, but we want to know more about what is the impact that these programs, these types of programs have on our district here in our home, and how are you going to prioritize those as we move forward? What is the impact that those programs have on our community, and how are you going to prioritize those as we look at funding as we move forward? Chris, I'm going to start with you on